Imagine signing divorce papers while your husband smirks and tells you you'll survive on scraps. Now imagine a judge opening a sealed envelope, your father's will, and reading aloud words that flip your life in one breath. He called me just a nurse. He planned to take my home, my money, even my father's land. But my father had one final protection buried in ink and love. Tonight, I'll tell you how a courtroom turned from humiliation to justice. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of papers being shuffled. I sat there with my hands clenched, trying to steady my breath. Across from me, my husband, Diego, leaned back in his chair. His suit was flawless, his hair perfectly styled, and that arrogant smile on his lips told me he believed he had already won. He signed the divorce papers with a flourish, then glanced at me with a mocking look. "You'll manage, Lucía," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "You're a nurse. You know how to survive scraps." Every word felt like a slap. For years, Diego had worked to make me feel small. He thought he knew everything about me, my family, my worth. He believed I had nothing of value left except what he had taken from me. But as the judge reached for a sealed envelope, my heart began to pound for a different reason. That envelope held my father's will, the truth Diego never bothered to ask about, the protection my father left for me, hidden in plain sight. I looked to my right. Sophia, my best friend and co-worker, sat quietly, but she squeezed my hand under the table. That squeeze was enough to remind me I wasn't alone, even if Diego wanted me to believe otherwise. The judge cleared his throat, preparing to read. Diego's smirk widened. He thought the land my father left me was worthless. He thought he was walking away with everything. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. "My name is Lucía, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones closest to you. 3 years ago, I was a different woman. I thought love was enough. I thought promises meant forever. And I thought Diego was the man who would stand by me through anything. We didn't meet at some glamorous gala. Our first meeting was far more ordinary, and maybe that's why it felt so real at the time. It was during a hospital fundraiser I had volunteered at. As a nurse, I was helping organize the event, arranging tables and greeting donors. I wasn't wearing anything fancy, just a modest dress and a tired smile after a long shift. That's when Diego walked in. Confident, polished, and impossible to ignore. He wasn't just handsome, he had that kind of presence that drew everyone in. People gravitated toward him, and when he finally came over to where I stood, it felt like all the noise in the room faded. "You must be the one running this place," he said with a grin, glancing at the way I was keeping everything organized. It was such a simple line, but it made me laugh, and for the first time in a long time, someone saw me as more than just another nurse in scrubs. After that night, Diego didn't waste time. Flowers started arriving at the hospital. He waited outside after my late shifts with coffee in hand. He took me to dinners I never thought I'd afford in my lifetime. Sophia, my best friend, teased me endlessly, saying I had finally stepped into one of those romance novels we joked about during breaks. 6 months later, Diego knelt down with a diamond ring that sparkled brighter than anything I had ever owned. And I said yes. I truly believed I had found my fairy tale. What I didn't know back then is that fairy tales can hide monsters, and mine was standing right in front of me. At first, everything with Diego felt perfect. Too perfect. He showered me with attention, gifts, and compliments. But slowly, little cracks began to show. It started with small comments that didn't seem so harmful at the time. I remember one night after a long shift, I told him about a patient who had finally recovered after weeks of care. I was proud, excited, sharing how fulfilling it felt. Diego chuckled, swirling his glass of wine. "That's sweet, Lucía," he said, "but let's be honest. Anyone can do your job. Changing bandages, holding hands, giving pills, it's not exactly rocket science." The words stung, but I brushed them off. He was tired, I told myself. He didn't mean it, except it didn't stop. At dinner parties with his colleagues, when people asked about me, he'd laugh and say, "Oh, Lucía's just a nurse. She keeps herself busy with that, while I take care of the real work." His friends chuckled politely while I sat there, smiling on the outside, dying on the inside. The worst was how he twisted my father's memory. My father had passed not long before I met Diego. He wasn't wealthy or famous, but he had worked his entire life with dignity and love. He taught me that kindness was more valuable than money, but Diego never respected him. One night, when I got emotional about missing my dad, Diego sighed. Lucía, enough. He was a factory worker. A good man, maybe, but you need to move on. You have me now. Stop clinging to the past. That was the moment something broke inside me. He didn't just belittle my work, he belittled my family, my roots, everything that made me who I was. The cracks in our fairy tale glass were spreading, and deep down, I feared it was only a matter of time before the whole thing shattered. The excuses began slowly, almost unnoticeably. At first, Diego said he had late meetings, big clients, big deals, the kind of work that was too complicated for me to understand. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man I married was still the same person who used to wait outside the hospital with flowers in hand. But the pattern grew. His phone never left his side. He'd smile at it, type quickly, and step into another room whenever I walked in. If I asked who it was, he would roll his eyes. Lucía, don't be paranoid. It's work. Work. That word became a wall between us. Nights that used to be filled with long talks and laughter turned into silence. He'd come home late, loosen his tie, pour himself a drink, and barely look at me. I'd ask how his day was. Fine, he'd mutter, already scrolling on his phone. One evening, I cooked his favorite meal, hoping to spark something, anything. He sat down, ate a few bites, then pushed the plate away. I'm not hungry. No thank you. No smile. Just cold indifference. I started doubting myself. Was I being too sensitive? Was I expecting too much? Sophia noticed the change before I even admitted it. One night after a shift, she said gently, Lucía, you're disappearing. He's making you feel smaller every day. That's not love. But I wasn't ready to face it. I kept telling myself he was stressed, overworked, tired. I tried harder, stayed quieter, made excuses. I was determined to save what little was left of us. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The man who once couldn't wait to be near me now couldn't care less if I was in the room. And soon, I would discover why. The truth came to me on a night I will never forget. I had just returned from a parent meeting at the hospital. One of my young patients was finally improving, and I felt proud. I wanted to share that joy with Diego, to remind us both of the love that once existed between us. When I walked into the house, I heard laughter coming from his study. Not the warm kind of laugh that used to make me melt, this was colder, sharper. I moved quietly, stopping just outside the door. That's when I heard him. Trust me, Javier, Diego said, his voice dripping with arrogance. She has no idea. She's so naive. Honestly, it's almost cute. He paused, then chuckled. She thinks I married her for love. My stomach dropped. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stop a gasp from escaping. He kept talking, each word slicing me open. Of course I had her sign everything. Do you think I'm stupid? When we divorce, she'll walk away with nothing. Meanwhile, I'll get it all, the house, the accounts, even that useless land her father left. She signed it over without even realizing what it meant. Javier must have said something on the other end, because Diego laughed again. A cruel, empty laugh. You're right. I deserve an award for this performance. 3 years pretending to love someone so boring and ordinary, but it'll be worth it when I cash out. I backed away, my hands trembling, my world tilted. The man I loved, the man I built a life with, had never seen me as anything more than a stepping stone, a pawn in his game of greed. That night, I lay beside him in bed, listening to him breathe peacefully, while my own chest burned with betrayal. I stared at the ceiling, one thought pulsing through my mind. I had married a stranger. The morning after that phone call, Diego kissed my forehead before leaving for work, as if nothing had happened. Have a good day at the hospital, sweetheart, he said softly. His voice was so gentle that, if I hadn't heard the truth with my own ears, I would have believed him. The moment the door closed, I called in sick. I had never done that before unless I was truly ill. But that day, I wasn't sick in body. I was sick in heart. I spent hours digging through our documents, every folder, every contract, every form I had ever signed. And what I found made my blood run cold. Diego had been planning this from the beginning. The house, in his name only. Our joint accounts? Structured so he had full control, while I needed his approval for larger withdrawals. Even the land my father left me was listed as collateral for our mortgage, something Diego convinced me was just routine paperwork. Page after page, I saw my own signature. I remembered the moments. Him sliding papers toward me, saying, "It's just insurance stuff. Don't worry." Or, "Trust me, Lucia. This is to protect us." But it wasn't for us. It was for him. By the time I finished reading, I felt hollow. The man who once promised to cherish me had turned my trust into a weapon against me. And if I didn't act soon, he would take everything, including the last piece of my father I had left. A week later, Diego came home with a bouquet of flowers and a bottle of wine. He was unusually warm, almost tender, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if maybe I had imagined it all. But then he sat down beside me on the couch, took my hands, and said, "Lucia, we need to talk." My heart sank. I already knew what was coming. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "and I think we both know this marriage isn't working anymore. We've grown apart. We want different things. It would be better for both of us if we ended it." He spoke as if he was being generous, like he was doing me a favor. Then he pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table. "These are the papers. It's straightforward. You'll get enough money to start fresh. Maybe rent a nice little apartment. Go back to school if you want." I stared at the folder, my hands trembling. "And the house? Well, it's in my name. I paid for it," he said smoothly. "But don't worry, I'm not heartless." "And my father's land?" I asked, my voice barely steady. For the first time, his mask slipped. Just for a second. "Lucia, we've been through this. The land is collateral. When we sell the house, the debt comes first, but the settlement will take care of you." He was lying through his teeth, and he thought I couldn't see it. That night, I read every word of the divorce settlement, and just as I suspected, it was a trap. According to those papers, I would get a small sum, barely enough to live on for a year. Meanwhile, Diego would walk away with the house, the cars, the accounts, and my father's land. I wanted to scream, to burn the papers in front of him, but I forced myself to stay calm. I needed a plan. The next morning, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney, Elena Vargas, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a voice that carried authority. When I told her everything, the phone call, the documents, the manipulation, she listened quietly, her fingers steepled. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Lucia, I'll be honest with you. It won't be easy. He's been clever. But clever isn't the same as invincible." Tears welled in my eyes. "So I'm just supposed to lose everything?" "Not necessarily," she said firmly. "Tell me about your father's land," I explained. "The old property, the barn, how Diego always told me it was worthless." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Have you ever had it appraised?" I shook my head. "Then that's where we start, and we'll dig deeper into your father's finances. Sometimes, the quietest men leave the loudest surprises." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope. 2 weeks later, Elena called me. "Sit down, Lucia. You need to hear this." I braced myself for bad news. Instead, her words left me dizzy. "Your father's land isn't worthless. It sits on top of a natural gas deposit. The energy companies in that area have been trying to buy mineral rights for years. That land is worth millions." I nearly dropped the phone. "That's impossible." "It gets better," she continued. "Your father set up a trust in your name, a hidden account, separate from any marital assets. With the way he invested, it's grown to over 2 million. I covered my mouth with both hands. My father, the man Diego mocked for being just a factory worker, the man who taught me that worth was measured in kindness, not wealth. He had been protecting me all along. Diego thought he was marrying a naive nurse with nothing. In reality, he had married the daughter of a man who quietly outsmarted him years before he even appeared in my life. By the time the final hearing arrived, Diego was smug as ever. He strolled into the courtroom with his expensive legal team, acting like the outcome was already written in his favor. He nodded at me with that same condescending look, as if to say, "Poor Lucia, she never stood a chance." But Elena leaned toward me and whispered, "Let him believe it. The fall will be that much harder." The judge opened the case, listing the assets in dispute. Diego's lawyer stood proudly, declaring that the land should be sold to pay debts, and that my settlement had already been generously prepared. Diego nodded along, playing the role of the caring, reasonable husband. Then Elena rose, calm, collected, with a stack of papers in her hands. "Your Honor," she said, "there are facts about my client's inheritance that must be clarified before any settlement can proceed." The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." As Elena began to read, I watched Diego's smirk freeze in place, and for the first time, I knew his empire of lies was about to collapse right in front of everyone. The judge opened the envelope with deliberate care, as though every second was meant to stretch Diego's arrogance thinner and thinner. The courtroom was silent except for the faint crackle of paper. According to the last will and testament of Señor Alvarez, the judge read, "The property in question is to remain solely in the possession of his daughter, Lucía Morales." Geological surveys have since revealed a natural gas deposit beneath the land. Current appraisal, $12 million. The words dropped like a thunderclap. Gasps broke out. Diego's lawyer froze mid-note. And Diego, his smirk dissolved. His face paled. His jaw went slack. But it wasn't over. The judge continued. Additionally, Mr. Alvarez established a trust account exclusively for his daughter. It is separate from any marital assets. Current value, over $2 million. I swallowed hard. My father, the man Diego had mocked as a simple worker, had quietly outsmarted him from the grave. Elena rose. "Your Honor, we also submit evidence of Mr. Serrano's attempt to manipulate my client into signing away rights to these assets." She placed a recording and documents on the table. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Serrano? Care to explain?" For once, Diego had no words. The judge permitted Elena to read a final document. "My father's letter. Lucía, if you are reading this, I am gone. I could not leave you riches, but I could leave you safety. This land, this trust, they are yours alone. Remember, worth is not in wealth, but in kindness and courage. And if someone ever tries to take this from you, let these papers protect you, as I no longer can." Tears blurred my eyes. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling his love in every word. I lifted my head slowly, and for the first time, met Diego's eyes without fear. He looked cornered, desperate, exposed. The man who thought he was untouchable was trembling in front of a judge. My father had been gone for years, but even in death, he was still standing between me and the man who tried to destroy me. The ruling was swift. The land and trust were mine. The prenup was void, and I was entitled to half of all marital assets. I gathered my documents with shaking hands, still stunned. Elena leaned in and whispered, "This is justice, Lucía. Take it in." Behind me, Diego's lawyer whispered frantically, but Diego didn't move. His hand clenched the edge of the table, knuckles white, his chest heaving like a man drowning. When we stepped into the hallway, he rushed after me. "Lucía, wait, please." His voice cracked. "We can fix this. I made mistakes, but I love you. Don't do this to us." I turned slowly. For once, I wasn't the one trembling. He was. "Fix this?" I whispered. "Diego, you planned to ruin me. You laughed about how easy it was. That isn't love. That's cruelty." He opened his mouth, but I walked away, and for the first time in years, I didn't look back. The news traveled quickly. Within days, I heard that Clara, the woman Diego had been seeing, was gone. A mutual acquaintance told me she had been boasting about the luxury life she'd enjoy once the divorce was finalized. But when she found out there was no fortune waiting, she vanished without a goodbye. It was almost laughable. Diego had chosen someone just like him, shallow, greedy, transactional. She hadn't loved him any more than he had loved me. Sophia smirked when she heard. "Poetic justice," she said. "He underestimated you, and now he's left with nothing but his own reflection." And she was right. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment. No more Diego, no more shadows. Just me, a stack of legal papers, and my father's letter spread out on the table. I read it again, each word sinking into me like medicine. "You are stronger than you know." For years, Diego convinced me I was small, insignificant, a woman who should be grateful for scraps of love. But my father had seen the truth. He had believed in me when I had forgotten how to believe in myself. tears slid down my face, not of grief this time, but of relief, of gratitude, of freedom. For the first time in years, I whispered into the silence, "Thank you, Papa. You saved me." And I finally allowed myself to believe it. I was enough. I always had been. The days after, the hearing felt strangely quiet. No more late-night arguments. No more Diego filling the house with his arrogance. Just silence. But silence can be healing. I remember waking up one morning and realizing I no longer had to look over at an empty side of the bed, waiting for a man who never really saw me. I didn't have to brace myself for another belittling comment about being just a nurse. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling like I was stealing air. Still, there was grief. Grief for the woman I used to be, the one who believed in fairy tales, who believed in Diego's promises, who believed love would be enough. That version of me had died in that courtroom. But maybe that wasn't tragedy. Maybe it was transformation. Words spread quickly. Diego, once the charming banker with everything, was now the man who lost it all. Colleagues distanced themselves. Friends stopped calling. Even his own family whispered about the shame he brought on their name. And Clara? Gone. Just like the money he thought he had in his hands. I heard from Sophia that he'd been seen alone at bars, drowning his pride at the bottom of expensive whiskey glasses. The man who used to walk into every room with confidence now looked like a shadow of himself. For a while, I thought seeing him fall would bring me satisfaction. But in truth, it didn't. His downfall wasn't my victory. My victory was surviving him. Weeks later, I ran into Judge Romero by chance in the courthouse hallway. He looked at me kindly. "You know," he said, "many people walk away from divorce angry, bitter, stuck in the past. But you walked away with dignity. Your father would be proud." Those words sank deep. Dignity. That was what Diego could never take from me, no matter how hard he tried. It wasn't about money, or land, or trust funds. It was about reclaiming myself. With Sophia by my side, I slowly began piecing my life back together. I moved into a modest apartment, decorated it with plants and soft colors, and filled it with laughter again. I threw myself into my work not because I had to anymore, but because I wanted to. Nursing had always been my passion. Every patient I cared for reminded me that I was valuable, not because of my bank account, but because of the lives I touched. And little by little, I started smiling again. Not the forced smiles I used to wear for Diego, real ones. Looking back now, it's almost surreal. The man who once mocked me for being ordinary, who laughed about how easy it was to control me, ended up losing everything. And me? I gained the one thing I thought I had lost forever myself. My father's letter sits framed on my desk. I read it often, especially on the hard days. Worth is not measured in wealth, but in kindness and courage. Those words guide me more than any amount of money ever could. And sometimes, life lets them underestimate you just long enough for you to rise stronger than they ever imagined. I'm not the same woman who said yes in a whirlwind of romance. I'm Lucía, a nurse, a daughter, a survivor, and finally, free.
Wow, what a journey. From being mocked and betrayed to finding strength, dignity, and freedom. Lucía's story reminds us of something powerful. People may try to underestimate you, but your worth is never defined by their opinions. Her father's love lived on through that letter, and in the end, Diego's cruelty couldn't destroy her, it only revealed her strength. But let me ask you this. If you were in Lucía's shoes, would you have walked away quietly or fought for justice like she did? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your take. And if this story hit you hard, trust me, the next one will leave you speechless. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button, tap the bell, and join us here on Lies and Regrets. Until next time, remember this: betrayal may break your heart, but it can also build the courage you never knew you had.